Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Scott Simmons podcast. I hope you are all having a wonderful week. And especially around this time, it's always good to kind of be thankful, which is kind of what our episode is about. It's about being thankful for all the different things that have happened in 2024. I almost said 2025, Micah, because I'm already thinking to next year. My mind's already in the future, but my body's in the past. So, joining me today
How does
is my
that work?
co-host. I don't know, man. I know it's like a Christopher Nolan movie. So
Inception?
Inception, Tenet, right? Oh, goodness. Hopefully not Memento, but anyway, joining me is Micah Kurt. Micah, how are you doing this week?
Apparently better than you are thinking about 2025 or the future and living in the past.
Mm, yeah.
Quite the
So
dichotomy.
I know. I'm starting to sound like a an older minister living in the past.
No comment.
Oh goodness. Oh man. So yeah, it's been quite a year, and we have what, like six weeks before we get into 2025. That's
That's nuts.
it is. It's nuts. And I just felt like, at least I felt like 2024 just kind of flew by a lot quicker than I realized. And I think a lot of that was just because just a lot of things that I'm involved in, and just just a lot of other stuff that's happening. So yeah, so before we dive into our topic of thankfulness, stories gone wild. Um, I guess I'll go first. It was quite interesting. So Micah, we always have during our church service, we have a children's moment time, and we have a couple people who do a kids moment, and they kind of share something with the kids before we dismiss them to Sunday school, during our 9 o'clock worship hour and our 11 o'clock worship hour. And one of the people who was doing children's moment decided to read a book about a quilt. It was like this, and it was a really good book, and it had a really good message. But man, this book was super long. It seemed like it took 20 minutes to read through this book. And it was wild because I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, okay, she's reading a kid's book, that's fine. And then every time she flipped the page, I'm like, okay, is it done? Is it done? And it just kept going. Um, but that was the funny thing, is because everyone kept talking about, oh, how that book was wonderful, how so powerful, but it also was long. But I think the wild thing about that is our 9 o'clock services, which is our contemporary service, which usually tends to run at time. And then our 11 o'clock service, which is our more traditional service, tends to run over a little bit because there's a lot more elements in worship um, that we do. And for some reason, that service, that 9 o'clock service, went over very long. Like we were already at like 10:15 before parents started coming to pick up their kids. Like it went 15 minutes over, that service did. So now I'm thinking, okay, for the 11 o'clock service, I'm trying to prepare myself to teach Sunday school, thinking, okay, like we're probably going to go over more. And next thing you know, I'm teaching and I start hearing noise, and I look, and the choir's coming up to the music room, and I'm looking around, I'm going, it's not even 12 o'clock yet, and already the choir's coming up. And I don't know if Pastor Colleen like revised her sermon and made it a little bit more quicker because she realized how long that story was at the first service. But service ended like 3 minutes early. Parents are picking up their kids 3 minutes early during the second service. I'm like, how does this work? That's just crazy. Um, so that's my story's gone wild. Micah, what's your story's gone wild?
Well, I kind of remember, I've worked in several different ministry situations, but the churches that have multiple services and, you know, the churches that have it down to a T and have been doing it for a while,
Uh-huh.
they kind of had the timing, you know, down, right? And then I remember churches trying it for the first time, and it's like, how do we juggle it, especially if you're doing 2 or 3 services? By the time you get to the third one, you can do whatever you want because there's no service after that. But the
Hmm.
first two, you have to be pretty precise in like what we're doing. Um,
Yeah.
and I think a lot of that, like, I mean, there's been things over the years like Planning Center Online and programs that will allow you to schedule your services and basically schedule it down to the minute. But
Hmm.
if you have a pastor who likes to preach or is long-winded or doesn't really pay attention to the clock or they feel like the spirit's moving, then if you have multiple services, you're in trouble. Um, Stories gone wild. I don't living a pretty boring life these days, Scott.
Well, you know what? Sometimes that's good. I mean, you didn't have anybody like run and just, like poop in the front yard of the church you attend, like mine last week.
No, did you share that during service yesterday?
You know what though? I did not share that during service, but it's funny because a lot of the people knew about it, but there were some people who don't. So at church, we had kind of like a coffee and community hour that the women of the church were putting on. So I was done. I was doing a drum line for a Christmas Eve service. We're doing a drum line for with some kids. So just kind of seeing who's there and kind of go through basics of drumming. But I went in there, I was talking, and said, "Oh, how's your week?" I'm like, "Oh," and then I kind of told that story, and a lot of these people didn't know, like, wait, what happened? I go, "Yeah, like, let me tell you what happened. Like, this is what I was told." And it's like, I'm like trying to get dressed, and I'm like, what the heck's going on over there? Because, the main pastor's out because it's she was recovering from working the polls, the election polls, uh, the day before, and it was just like it was just a crazy story, and people didn't know about it, so they just started laughing, thinking this is like the weirdest story they've ever heard. So anyway, it was quite a habit, but I don't think a lot of people at church know that that even happened.
Yeah, well, it's quite the story.
Oh my gosh, yes it is. Oh goodness. Yeah, so kind of shifting to our main topic of thankfulness, I thought it'd be kind of good just to kind of in retrospect think about just 2024 and think about all the different things that we're thankful for. And I thought this would be something for us just to kind of do to kind of be a retrospective all the different things that we can be thankful for this year. So I'll go ahead and start first because I know I kind of dropped this on you last night, and um,
What are you
I want to
talking
give
about? You
you.
always drop things on me.
I know it's the Scott Stedman way of just dropping things.
At least we're consistent.
Well, yeah, I mean, at least you know what to expect. Well, and part of that is I don't get like a good idea for anything to talk about until usually the day before or 2 days, something kind of hits me. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Which I feel like that's kind of that now that's kind of being more consistent towards the end of the year because I feel like all my ideas I had at the beginning we've done, and now it's like, oh, or they're ideas that I've had, and then after sitting for a while, they're just like, yeah, it's not good. Like that's one that can just stay put. Like it's not either we're not going to do it or it's just not the good time to do that episode. Um, but yeah, but yeah, I feel like now it's to the point where it's like, okay, I don't really have anything anymore to discuss or talk about because it's just end of this year and frankly, there hasn't been a lot of big I guess that's one thing I'm thankful for. I feel like the last couple years there's always been these gigantic or big scandals that have happened in like whether they're big denominations or big churches or whatnot. Like we hear about it and there's big reports on it. And this year, there hadn't been many. I mean, the only thing that I can think of this year that kind of came on my radar was the whole John Paul Miller, Micah Miller story, which is still ongoing, by the way. Like there's more stuff coming out from that. So, but other than that, like that's the only one. So, in some ways, I'm thankful that we're not having to deal or process all the crazy church stuff that's been happening over the years, and kind of, I don't know, like kind of almost make a almost a defense that, hey, the church is still good, the church is still loving, the church is a place for healing, even though there are some churches that have messed up right now, and it's not a good place to heal. It's not a good place to grow in your spiritual life. So in a way, I'm thankful for that we haven't reported on a lot of church scandals or church abuse this year.
We were given a break.
Yeah. They're giving us a break because, man, when 2025 comes along, woo.
Well, there wasn't, a lot in the way of that stuff. And by the way, I haven't heard much about that in like a Miller
Yeah. I
in a
mean,
while. I
oh
know
yeah,
it's
in a
still,
while.
that was huge, I think.
Yeah.
Uh, I can't think of anything else really. I mean, there was a lot of, if you talk about, you know, the the different denominations, whether it's Presbyterian or Methodist, really, or Church of God for that matter, kind of like working through the affirmation
Mm,
conversation of the LGBTQ plus community. Um, every denomination is dealing with that. So
yeah. With
that's an ongoing story, though. That's been
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and even with that, I think just I guess I wouldn't call that necessarily scandalous, but in some cases it is, depending on the denomination and what your view with towards the LGBTQIA community, just kind of, how open or closed are we going to be to this group? And
sure.
I think, especially within the Church of God, I think the biggest scandal that has come out was the fact that some states were revoking credentials for to people who signed the Cog Affirm website, um, and people who just really wanted to kind of have a conversation about, hey, should we be more open and be a safe place for the LGBTQIA? At least that was kind of the intent from both Nick and Karma when we interviewed them last year. Like that was the intent. And since that was the intent, and people decided, hey, we're going to revoke your license. And even from Karma writing about her experience and going to national, and even nationals kind of like, wait, what? Like they're kind of like, wait a minute. No, they're kind of shocked by just how quickly they're able to remove people without even having the conversation. So I think that's I
Yeah, it's
mean,
like you sign something, you don't know what you're signing, and they don't know what you're signing, and they're going to take your credentials away because you signed something.
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so I mean, again, but even in that, that's still on the spectrum of a little scandalous to a lot of scandalous. It's still kind of, at least within the Church of God, it's not that big of a scandal because I would assume that a lot of the majority of Church of God pastors and lay leaders are probably in the mindset of not being as affirming of the LGBTQ community as other people who did actually sign the petition on the Cog Affirm website. Um,
Fascinating conversation for sure.
yeah, absolutely. So, Michael, what's one thing you're thankful for?
Uh, I think probably number one has to be my daughter, birth of my daughter this year.
Yeah.
I've shared, on this podcast and others numerous times that my wife and I weren't sure if we were going to be able to have children. In fact, the doctors told us that we wouldn't. And we were talking about it yesterday, but Alicia and I were like, this time last year, we found out that we were pregnant. And Audrey, Christine joined us in June. And,
Mm,
yeah, it's just turned our world upside down in a good way. Just like
Yeah.
learning how to be parents, learning how to balance, learning how to.
Yeah. And I can't even, and again, because it wasn't my experience, but I can't even comprehend the journey you two have been on, that knowing that, hey, we've been trying to have kids, we can't have kids. Medical personnel told us we can't have kids. And then next thing you know, Alicia says she's pregnant, and now you have a daughter. And I
Yeah.
mean, I think that's just kind of a, that's something that I can't comprehend, but I think that's probably like a very weighing and emotional journey that the two of you have been on
Well,
for years,
yeah,
I
'cause
would say.
we resigned ourselves to the fact that we probably wouldn't have kids of our own.
Hmm.
And we had grieved that, we had mourned that, and we got to the point where it's like, I guess it's just not in the cards for us. And I don't know if I shared it on this podcast before, but last year we went on a family vacation to Gatlinburg, Tennessee. And we were on our way home. We were just talking in the car. We got back to town, we went to the restaurant, and had dinner. So we didn't in the house, and so we were like, well, since we're not able to have children, like, do you need to like go see your OBGYN? Do you need to have the conversation of like, do you need to get back on birth control, like to help regulate with hormones and everything, XYZ. And
Mm.
we just didn't even address it. And then obviously, everything else worked out. But I, you know, every day it's a blessing for sure. But at the same time, it's like, I mean, your kids are a little older now, but like, I've never had a baby. So I've never had to, figure that out. Whether it's, can you watch her while I cook? Can you change her diaper while I get ready? Can you um, watch her today while I run to the grocery store? You
Hmm.
hold her while I, you know, whatever, right? You've been there with your kids, you
Yeah.
know that. But like, you know, it's certainly a new, a new chapter and a new, I guess, a new way of life. But it's kind of interesting, and you probably could speak more into this than I could because again, kids are older. But like seeing your kids grow up and kind of reliving your life through them, through their eyes, and
Hmm.
seeing little things that like you're like, well, maybe I did that when I was Peter's age, or you know, Lizzie's age. Oh, that's 100% me. No, that's 100% Alicia. Like, you know what I mean? Like you see
Oh
these
yeah.
things where characteristics, I guess, where it's like, you know, Audrey loves to sleep, and I'm not complaining because most parents have that where their kids get up two, three, four times a night, and you know,
Yeah.
I think it was Saturday night. Audrey slept 10 hours,
Mm.
and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. Whereas
Yeah.
my friend Chad at work had twins, and he was up he like there would be 2 3 days where he just didn't sleep
Hmm.
at a time because he was so tired, or
Yeah.
his kids
And
would keep him up.
yeah, and I think that's the one thing about kids is, as they start developing, and even now, even though my kids are older, it's interesting to see a whole different aspect as far as, my son now being more involved in sports. Because before he was content with making music, playing music, learning how to play guitar. Um, and even though he still likes music and he still loves to listen to music, like he's like, okay, I want to do sports. So he did football this year and he did flag football this year. Now he's doing wrestling now and just kind of like, okay, like, and even for me, it's like, okay, well, everything's always on a Sunday. So how do I get to the opportunity to experience my son doing something when I have to work? So it's stuff like that where I go, okay, like that's difficult. to kind of navigate that time. At the same time, I see my daughter, she's developing a personality and she's developing friends, and she's always asking, people are always asking to do play dates or for her to bring friends over to the house, or Peter's asking to bring friends over to the house. And I'm like, yeah, like I don't care if you bring people over and have them, just make sure their parents know where they are. I don't want to be like, where's my kid? My kid's not here at pickup because he went off with their friends, which has happened to some families before in our community. But yeah, I think it's kind of it's very it's very different. And I think as your daughter gets older, you're going to start noticing things like maybe she's going to be like, hey, I want to play Mario with my dad, and you two are now playing Super Mario Brothers 3 and having a good time doing that. And it's like, oh my gosh, like I have a little mini me, a little player two with me. So, it's that sort of thing that's like pretty cool. Um, so I think that the next thing I would say that I'm thankful for, I'd have to say the community I live in. I'm very thankful for being in a very small community. And even though even though I really loved living in Stanton, which is another small community out in Virginia, like living in Bexley has been interesting to say the least, because it just, I have sidewalks that I could walk down. And as I'm walking down the sidewalks, my neighbors are saying hi to me and they know who I am and I know who they are. And I have that relationship where I didn't really have that in Virginia because there was no sidewalks. Everything was on hills. And where I lived, you're the only person who lived close to you would have been the neighbor who was living in front of me, who had the house in front of me. And that was it because everything was so spaced out. Um, Me being more involved in the school, so I'm getting to know the principal, staff, teachers, and I go and I help do math tutoring for my daughter's class. And even then, like there's other teachers who have asked me, like, "Hey, do you think you can? We see how good you're doing with these students in this lady's classroom. Can you know, help us out?" It's like I don't really have the time to do that, but if it works out, I might be able to help. So it's stuff like that where, just living in a community where everybody's just so kind, so nice, so helpful. I mean, we do have a little bit of people in the community that can be kind of a little bit of a pain, but usually those are the people who just complain on like the community Facebook pages. Um, but for the most part, it's just an interesting, different community. And it's nice that I'm in kind of a little community off of a big city. So it's like, oh, one of my favorite bands is playing, and they're actually playing local in town. So I can actually go. And, I was talking with a woman because Sixpence None the Richer played a couple weeks ago here in Columbus. And I told her, asked her how the show was, and she was telling me like, oh, here's this, here's that. And I said, oh, cool. And I just kind of said, I really wanted to go, but I've already been to 6 concerts already this year, and I'm sure my wife would kill me if I went to another one. So, but that was something where in Virginia, if there's a band that was playing, it'd probably be out in Richmond or Virginia Beach. And it's like, okay, I could drive an hour and a half to 3 hours to go see them play, or I can on the offshoot, maybe they're playing in Charlottesville or Harrisonburg. But for the most part, like I didn't get to go see a lot of concerts because none of the bands were playing anywhere close that was like within driving distance. So, just being in a community and just kind of living closer to a bigger city has just kind of been it's definitely, life has been different than it was when I lived in Virginia, both for in a good and positive way, but mostly very positive.
I mean, I will say too, I mean, getting to know you and doing the show with you for the last 3 years now, yeah, going on
Hmm.
3 years. You know, when I started, you were still in Virginia,
Hmm.
and you made the transition to back to Ohio, and you just seem in a better space, both head wise, health wise. You just seem to be
Hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that statement.
like that you're not that you weren't feeling well. You just, I guess, look better and sound better, and you're more positive. Not that you weren't being positive, but like you know, ministers can get to a space in their ministry at a church that they're serving, and they're just not healthy. And,
Mm-hmm.
even during
Yeah.
this, even during a transition, you're still kind of dwelling on what could have been
Mm-hmm.
and what could I have done better and XYZ. But like, and this isn't a bash on Church of God because you and I both hold those credentials, but like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you're not the only person that has told me that they've made, ministry transition to a different denomination, and that denomination is working out better for them than the Church of God did in
Mm.
respect to like how they're treated, in respect to how, you know, they respect you because you bring a different perspective into their world, their denomination. Um, it's it's refreshing, right?
Yeah.
And so, um, I was having a conversation with a friend the other day, and they were like, I'm looking for a new job church wise, and I don't know that I'm going to do Church of God. I think I'm going to give Church of God a break for a while.
Mm.
And so, and I know for you, it wasn't necessarily for a lack of trying to be in the Church of God, you know, making that transition, but, obviously got other plans and actually UMC worked out, and you guys seem to be doing really well there.
Yeah. And I would even say just the I'd say for that because I know there's still like pastors and maybe some pastors who are kind of floating and I mean and I think that was always the hard part for me because being Church of God and by being Church of God, like growing up in a Church of God congregation that had heavily influenced me and really felt the call to ministry within the Church of God. Had a lot of great discipleship within my own church and even with camp ministry, kind of really influenced and kind of really helped plant those seeds. Be going to Anderson and kind of confirming the call there, going through the ordination process, being ordained, working in Church of God churches. Like, and again, it wasn't a lack of trying, just things didn't work out due to, the transition between Minister Connector and Atlas and even just just even trying to, since everything's always done by volunteers within the Church of God, especially when it comes to um, your credentialing committee and switching out your credentials to different states, like sometimes that can get messy or muddy if communication's not good
The
or
glorified pain in the rear end.
it is. And so, for those of you who are maybe in that position or you're looking to work at another church and maybe you're in that same thing, because for me it was a struggle. Like, you know, I identify with Church of God. I still believe in the Church of God theology and some of their beliefs and everything else. And so the fact that I couldn't find a Church of God church to serve in was very disheartening. And it's like, well, I mean, we are a small denomination. Where am I going to A, find a church, and B, find a church that's going to fit the needs for me and my family? And that was kind of a very legitimate thing. And because there's some places that just weren't going to work for us for a number of reasons. And there's probably some churches that I wasn't going to work for them for a number of reasons. But the fact that I'm able to, in fact that I was found by a UMC pastor who saw my skill set and said, "Hey, we think that your skill set would actually work for us. Let's talk." We talked, came by, had the interview, and got hired. So to me, it was just like, okay, well, this definitely wasn't the path that I would have chosen, but it's working out. And I can only contribute that to, the guidance of the Holy Spirit who knew what I needed right when I needed it. And, a place that I can still do ministry and also can still heal at the same time.
Yeah,
So,
I think
Michael,
that.
oh, go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
Sorry.
Sorry.
No,
No,
no, I
you're
was
good.
just, no, no, finish up. I was going to transition to something else. I was going to segue to something else.
No, it's fine. Yeah, I would agree. I see so many young pastors kind of like without a path, and um, I've had several conversations with Jeanette Flynn, who's been on the show, and we've talked about this a lot recently, but like, you know, the fact that the older generation's not willing to step aside, not have any sort of contingency plan, may be the demise of the Church of God.
Mm,
Like maybe the maybe the red herring that can prevent the Church of God from growing and thriving again. So
mm.
um another thing I'm thankful for is finishing my master's. Like I finished it earlier this year and graduated. Most ready to pull that trigger on that doctorate. I'm completely ready yet. I did sign up for a class for the winter term as an elective that I can transfer into the program if and when I decide to do that.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, I mean, that's quite an accomplishment. Like, I know when I graduated with my master's, I was, oh boy, I was pretty stoked by it. Like, it was, it was really good. I felt like, in some ways, I kind of felt like my educational journey was complete. I got ordained, I finished with my master's. I am a complete. And yet there was still a part of me that wanted to go get my doctorate, but I'm like, now's not the time. And I know there's a lot of people who I took master's classes with. Yeah, right after they graduate their master's, they're ready to go get their doctorate. And I'm thinking, yeah, no, like not for me right now, like absolutely not. And now that I'm kind of working towards my doctorate and kind of in this like last half of my doctorate, like um it's been quite a journey and it's been a very fruitful journey and it's not like one of those things where like now that I'm done with like my core classes and I'm now have to finish up my project, like it's not like I really don't want to do this or I just don't like my topic anymore or anything like that. Like it's to the point where I'm like, I'm so excited about my topic, and even when I talk to people about it, or even like I had a meeting. There's a like a Cohatch place, which is like kind of like a place where you can rent office space to for like short-term office space opportunities. I just went in there to look at it because I was just curious more than anything and just kind of look at the space and what they can do and what are some of the interesting things they can do within their space. And when I explained kind of like what I do and kind of like my doctorate training, like even the guy was like, oh my gosh, like this is good stuff. Like I think we need more people who can help with like leadership transitions because that seems to kind of always be the one thing that can kind of either make or break your company is how well a transition goes with your CEO or with your pastor or anything like that. So it's almost kind of like anytime when I have those conversations with like random people who may not even be church people, and I'm just telling them that, they're just like, oh my gosh, that's so interesting and that's so much needed. And I'm like, oh,
so,
okay.
so
Like,
I Googled, what percentage of Americans have an advanced degree just now while
mhm.
you were talking. What do you think the percentages of Americans that have advanced degree? And by advanced degree, I mean master's, doctorate, etc.,
Oh my
graduate
goodness.
certificate.
I mean, if we're counting doctors, 'cause I know like in the medical field, you have to get an advanced degree to even just be a doctor.
Go to
I
medical
almost want
school.
to, yeah, medical school, everything else. I'm trying to think of like I'm gonna have to say I'm gonna say at least maybe 20 to 30%.
According to Google, according to recent data, approximately 14.4% of Americans hold an advanced degree, which includes a master's, professional certification, and or doctoral degree.
Wow, that's interesting.
Out of like, I think the population in America is like 360 million or something like that. Only 14% of folks have an advanced degree.
That's crazy. That's
And
crazy.
so I was just thankful that I was in a space where I could do it. I was thankful that I was in a space that supported me. My office staff supported me while I did it. I was able to adjust my work schedule. You know, it didn't cost me anything because I work at the university, which is great. When I do, when I want to pursue the doctorate, it would be the same deal where I don't have to pay for it. We have a tuition waiver. So I'm thankful for that.
Yeah.
the ability to continue my education while I work. And, it was a crazy season of life for sure because, I was diagnosed last year with severe anxiety disorder and so I
Yeah.
was working full time, found out I was going to be a father, was going through some stuff with my own family, and was trying to complete a degree all at the same time. And ironically, I got straight A's. It was like one of those like I felt like my classes were like kind of like my escape. My homework and stuff was kind of like my escape from it all. And I thrived in that environment. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's great. Um, oh boy, I think for me, the one thing that I'm thankful for has to be at the church I'm working at. Um, because even through the kind of the, every church has their challenges, and even through the challenges, um,
Like somebody pooping in the front yard.
like someone pooping in the front yard of the church, or I mean, we had a transfer of leadership with our preschool, so we had to like, and then of course there was no like documentation or any bylaws or rules that kind of oversaw like who did that hiring or whatnot, so the church.
I just thought of something this guy.
Yeah.
We could do a Stories Gone Wild episode of just all the crazy stuff that's happening at your church since you've been there. The fire department incident, the smoke, the sound
Oh,
system fiasco, the person defecating in the front yard. I mean,
well, that's the type
somebody
of stuff you
breaking.
get from living in a big city. A lot of things happen. But no.
Having to like let the Ethiopian church or whatever folks that are using your guys' building at like 4 o'clock in the morning because that's when they wanted to have services.
Oh yeah,
Was
like
it wasn't Ethiopian, was it?
no, it is Ethiopian. You're
Oh, it
correct.
is. Oh,
Yes.
okay, good.
No, you are correct with that. Yeah, I mean, I think, but even then, like just the support. And I think that's it. The support from staff, the support from just the congregation and the people, and affirmation that the affirmation that I'm doing a good job, even when there's problems, even though when I may have dropped the ball on certain things or anything else. The fact is they
There's
still see
grace.
there's grace, there's forgiveness, there's people are willing to sit and have a discussion when there is a up when something does happen. It's not like, oh, by the way, um, I'm finding this out through like a meeting and no one's talked to me about it. I'm like, what the heck's going on? I didn't know any of this was going on. I'm completely blindsided. Um, but most of all, like even and I think, if anybody who has been in ministry and has been burned in ministry, you get to a point, especially when you're in that kind of that in between season when you're not at working at a church, but you're trying to find your next place to do ministry, and you're kind of in that between. There's a lot of times where you could think like, should I even be doing this? Should I be, am I actually equipped to do ministry now? Like, because obviously things didn't go well, things ended on a very sour note, and you start to kind of double. And I think, it's almost like kind of like one of those things. Well, first you're gonna like blame the place you left because they're this, they're that, or you can and some of it may be justified, some of it may just be emotions pouring out. Um, but then you can get to a point where you go, okay, maybe I'm the problem. I screwed up. I did this. Maybe I'm not good. Maybe I'm not skilled enough. Maybe I'm the one who has been I'm the one who caused all the issues and the problems. And you kind of be self-reflective, and it's like, well, should I even serve a ministry? Am
Well,
I even good? Even and you get to that point where you start to kind of crap on yourself and you feel down. But then when you go to a place that's healthy and you realize it, and you start talking about things, and people are like, oh my gosh, that's genius, and you're thinking, really? Because last time I said this at the last place, they thought I was an idiot, and you guys are thinking I'm a genius, and we do it and it works. and we start seeing all this improvement. And it's like, hey, you sit there and sometimes you get into like a suspension of disbelief because you're thinking like, I'm living in a whole different, I'm like in a whole different like metaverse right now. Because what, like, it's like everything I touch now turns to gold. It's like, man, everything I touched at the last place turned to poo. Like, what's going on?
Well, I did want to say too that like, I had a therapy appointment last week. Um, excuse me, got a little tickle in my throat there. I had a therapy appointment last week, and was talking to my therapist, and we were talking about, you know, some family dynamics, but we were also talking about some ministry things. And she said that, one of the greatest things you can do is accept responsibility for some of the things that happened, even though you were angry, even though you wanted to blame the other party involved, especially in ministry, you want to blame the church, it didn't work out. But like you just said, Scott, you might be the problem, or there may be things in your leadership, reflecting back on it that you might have changed or done differently, or not even bothered with. But realizing that, you know, realizing that, realizing and accepting that you will have a part in that is going to bring more healing as a result. And I think you and I've talked about that offline, about, some other friends of ours who are in transitions in ministry. And it's like, it's not just one-sided, right? And when I've transitioned from churches, there are things that I wish I would have done differently or handled differently. There's also this big sense of relief when I leave a ministry situation, because it's just, I knew that it wasn't healthy for me, but it was also probably not healthy for them, and they weren't healthy. But accepting responsibility is huge, and giving yourself um, that release of um, grieving that situation and that burden that you carry transitioning out of the situation. And that could be secular jobs too. I mean, it's not just churches. I mean, people get mad and quit jobs all the time. And, looking back on it, it's like, you know, maybe I could have handled that better.
Absolutely.
I mean, would you agree with that? Like, that
I
from a counseling perspective is, if you learn to not forgive, if you learn to accept responsibility on your end just as much as they should have, that's going to give you, healing faster than holding on to it.
Yeah, and I would even say, I think there was a part of me because there's been, I mean, not to get into the weeds, but there's so many situations where I would apologize, even though, even in retrospect, I probably shouldn't have apologized because I had no need to apologize because I didn't do anything wrong in certain things. Like in like
Sure.
the first couple of years of ministry, like, it was mainly more of one person just flat out didn't like me and wanted me gone, and they made it their whole mission to see that either I quit or I get fired. Like that was their whole mission. And that's not me like assuming that that's actual fact, because I have a written document from that person saying this is my plan all along and you're awful and blah blah blah. So I mean, at the same time, there are probably other, so especially when it got toward the later years, and I just got to a point where I felt like I'm just tired of apologizing because I don't think I did anything wrong. And you kind of, and again, I think that's kind of an ego thing in some ways. Like, even though it was like a weird, like, I don't know, like reverse ego, because it's like, you know, I say I'm sorry, but I'm also more disgruntled about it because it's like, well, why should I apologize this? Because I didn't do anything wrong. I asked a question and everyone got all mad because I asked a question. But I can think about maybe my body posture, my tone, and even just my mindset probably wasn't in the best place for me to be able to have that conversation. So you kind of go back, and I think that's the thing about time, because you can kind of go back and you can kind of reflect at everything. And there's some things where I'm like, there's things I apologize for that I shouldn't have apologized. There's things that, I kind of stood my ground, or I kind of got to the point where I was like, I'm not going to move from this spot when I probably should have moved. And there's probably times where I moved when I probably shouldn't, where I should have stood my ground. And I think that's just kind of, I think that's just kind of the bumps you take of being a, still very young, semi-experienced minister, where you're still trying to learn the ropes. And I think, um, I had to fall there so that I can run here. Um, and I think the difference is I can run longer because I actually have people who are willing to run the race with me, people who I'm willing to pass the baton off, and I can go take a break. I have people who are able to give water to me so I can rehydrate while I keep running. So I'm not kind of doing this alone and hoping everyone else is following me. Like, we're all kind of together, running this race and trying to do what we can to make the church better for the people who attend and for the community that we're in. And with all the consulting things we've been doing this past year and marketing things we've been doing this year, then also, and I don't think I ever mentioned this to you, Micah. Maybe I did. I don't remember because things have been crazy, but I'm actually getting a new job title next year. So, yeah,
Yeah, you did mention that last week. And
yeah.
it's
So,
it's again, just showing that you have grown and that they trust you and that they have the confidence in you to do what you need to do. And and what I meant before was like I didn't mean that, like, there weren't circumstances where, in the church, you're in a ministry where, things are going crazy. Like, I'm just saying that, like, for your own peace of mind, when you transition out of the church, realizing that there may have been things that you have done, that you might have done wrong, or that you need to work through,
mm,
and in an effort to give yourself that peace. And it, I'm not saying that everything. I'm just saying there might have been some things. Just I don't know, man. I got so much to be thankful for.
yeah,
The
yeah,
I'm really thankful for my in-laws. A lot of people don't have you know great in-laws, but I do. I'm very fortunate to have in-laws that love me and have brought me into their family and accepted me for who I am. They take care of my family. We're there for them. It's a good relationship, especially when things aren't as great with my family.
mm, yeah, yeah, and yeah, and I think that's great too. I know I'm fortunate because I have, you know, three families. My immediate family, my stepfather, and my stepmom. And so, I mean, Christmas, we're going to three different houses. So, and all these holidays. But, the fact is I don't really have a lot of disgruntled or negativity. It's not like if I go somewhere, I'm thinking, oh man, like I don't want to have to deal with all the drama and the fighting and any of this stuff. Like, for the most part, like, everyone's very kind, everyone's very good. Even though I may have some family members who have certain beliefs that, may be a little bit more extreme than my own beliefs. At the same time, it's like, deep down, I know they're good people. Deep down, if I disagree with them, they know I'm a good person, and we just get along. Like, we kind of can talk things through. And I know we can talk things through, or even just the fact that I can, just talk to anybody, and everyone's just like, I'm very interested in what's going on in their lives. They're interested in what's going on in my lives. And regardless of any type of religious beliefs, political beliefs, um, child raising beliefs, and or whatever the case may be, like, we're pretty solid. But I do know other families, like I know my sister, like I know my family's pretty good. I know her husband, sometimes their family's hit or miss depending on if it's going to be a good year or a not so great year, uh, navigating due to, just a lot of plethora of things. So the fact that you are able to have a family that you can connect with, um, that has like a little bit more positivity while your other family's kind of going through a season of negativity, is pretty good. So it's not like both your in-laws and your immediate family are just constantly negative, and you're just like, oh man, it's holidays, and where are we going to go? Because I really don't want to be around anybody this year. So it's good to have like at least an anchor, I would say, an anchor family that you can feel safe and comfortable and be able to have good conversations and be seen and heard and accepted.
Uh, I mean, granted, there are things, we always joke about it, but at Christmas, like when we go to Alicia's grandma's house, yeah, fight for a seat at the kids' table, meaning that there's a table away from the main table in the dining room.
Mm-hmm.
And the kids' table doesn't mean kids. I mean, it's like adults. So, like, you always want to see the kids' table because in the main table, all you're going to hear about is religion and politics. And sometimes those conversations don't go great. So, depending on who's there.
Yep. 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 All right. Well, I mean, I could probably go on and on with this episode about thankfulness and everything else, but I think that's going to do it for us. There's just a lot more stuff we could share about thankfulness, but I definitely don't want people listening to a 3-hour Scott Stedman episode. But I guess, last thing I would say is, I'm thankful for all you guys who listen to us. I mean, the fact that we're able to have you guys listen to us, have you guys comment on our episodes, send us messages, or even sometimes just knowing that there's other people who are interested in the topics that we're communicating, it just means everything to us. So I think that's great. And Mike, I'd say I'm thankful for you too, because I mean, I've been more consistent with this podcast, having you on the show, than when I was doing this solo. Because sometimes it's like, I don't have anything. I'm not going to just go up there and just say stuff. So it's always good to have a back and forth and have a conversation and have someone who doesn't think I'm crazy when we talk about things, and even someone who disagrees with me and goes, hey, I think you have to look at it this way too. And it's like, oh yeah, you're right. So again, thankful for you as well.
Yeah, same to you, and giving me an opportunity to do something that I've always wanted to do. And, we did on Nerd Talk before. The other podcast we do frequently, but, the show is another, outlet for us to talk shop, which is great.
Yeah. All right, friends. Well, I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving. I hope you guys have hopefully if you're doing Black Friday shopping, be careful. And we'll be back on next week with another episode. Thank you for listening to the Scott Stedman Podcast. The Scott Stedman Podcast is made possible by support from our listeners. We thank listeners like Patty and Scott, whose support goes to this podcast's continual growth and maintenance. If you want to support this podcast, you can do so in a number of ways. First, feel free to give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed this episode and share it with your friends. If you'd like to financially support the Scott Stedman Podcast, you can go to the website ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman Podcast. That website again is ko-fi.com/the Scott Stedman Podcast. Thank you so much for listening.